Welcome to the video where I changed the starter in my 2007 BMW 328xi. Here I'm showing you the pieces that we're going to be removing. That's going to include the engine cover, the intake manifold, the air box, and the cowling. First you'll locate the clamp that holds the air tube on and the mass airflow sensor. Here I'm removing the tube with a screwdriver, and then I will remove the mass airflow sensor connector. Then there you see me removing the snorkel from the front of the motor, and there I'm removing the air box. That air box has the mass airflow at the back like you just saw. Once the air box is out of the way, you can remove the two bolts that hold the power steering reservoir on. So once those are off, you can just lift the power steering reservoir up. You'll not have to disconnect any of the power steering hoses, but you will have to disconnect this vacuum line. That is a squeeze type connector, so you'll just squeeze it and pull it out, and that will just kind of move out of the way. After you've moved that out of the way, you can swing your power steering reservoir out of the way and kind of put it up near the side of the fender. The next thing you're going to do is going to remove the cabin air filter box that has four 10mm screws that hold it. There's two on the driver's side and two on the passenger side. Here I'm only showing you removing the two on the driver's side. Then you just lift the box off. Now is a good time to change that cabin air filter if you haven't done that recently. So then you'll lift that cover off that covers up the brake fluid reservoir, and then you'll disconnect the ambient air sensor. Once you've disconnected the ambient air sensor, you can pull that little rubber tab out of the way, and that pretty much so just releases that cowling. You can pull that cowling off and that weather stripping off. Once you've done that, these two wire looms are free. You won't do anything with those wire looms. You can just work around those later. Then we're removing the tube that goes to the throttle body. And there you can see the throttle body. Now we're going to remove the engine cover. You're going to find three Allen type bolts, and those are 5mm Allen to remove that. After these three bolts are removed, all you have to do is kind of lift up and slide out the engine cover. This same exact process will work on N52 motors, which is what this is, but it'll also work on N53 and N54 motors. So pretty much so a very wide range of motors. At this point, you can get to the bolts that hold on the intake manifold. Those are 11mm bolts and nuts. So you'll take off all 12 of them, and after that's done, your intake manifold will be free of coming off. There is a connector on the far back side of the intake manifold. You'll need to take that off also. Now notice the wires that come up out from between the intake manifold. Those go to the fuel rail, and there are two connectors that need to be removed from there. So you'll just use a screwdriver to pull back the tabs, and then you'll just pull those off. You'll also need to remove the connector that goes to the oil sending unit. So that oil sending unit one has a little metal clip that you have to pull back, and then that connector will pop right off. After making sure all the connectors are free, you can just pull off your intake manifold. Now that your intake manifold is free, now you can get rid of some of the other components that'll hold that intake manifold from coming off easily. Now you'll notice there are two metal bars that go from above the struts to the center of the windshield, and those two metal bars are stiffeners, and we need to remove the one on the driver's side. So in order to do that, we'll need to remove the windshield wipers and then this little plastic cover that goes over the windshield wipers. Now right in the center you'll see a bolt. I did not show you loosening those bolts up, but you'll need to loosen that up, and there's one bolt over the strut. Once those are loose, you can pull the bar out, and that will allow you to pull the intake manifold further to the right and allow you plenty of access to the starter. And there you can see the starter. So once the starter is exposed, you'll need to remove that one nut and that one connector from the back of the starter. Previous to doing any of this, you will want to remove the battery. There I'm showing you also the two bolts that hold the starter in place. So once the connectors are off, you'll need to remove the starter. You'll be using an E-style, which is an external Torx socket to remove that. It actually has 6-point star, and the socket is designed to pull that off. So you pull the one from the under the starter there, and the second one comes from behind the motor, over by the bell housing to the transmission. You'll need to get at that with a very shallow ratchet. So I got a shallow ratchet with a sort of a rotating head, and that worked really good. These are aluminum bolts, and they're a single use, so you'll need to get some new aluminum bolts when you get your new starter. After the bolts are removed, you can wiggle the starter up and down, and the starter will pop right out. The N52 block is an aluminum magnesium alloy, so it may actually sort of corrode and hold that starter in place. On a bad note, you may have to just hit the starter with a mallet. As you can see, I didn't have to here, but sometimes it's froze on there pretty hard. So now you're going to want to carefully look at your new starter compared to your old starter, and make sure that all the connections are right and the sizes look good, just to make sure you have the right part. So here you can see that I'm going to put in the new starter, and you kind of have to work it into place, into the bore right there, and line up those bolts by eye, bolt holes by eye. Then you can start by putting in the bolts that hold it in. I will usually start with the bolt that you can get to from the back. That way I'll be able to put my hand down behind, start the bolt, and wiggle the starter around until that bolt starts, because you want to get that one started first, because it's the hardest one to start. If you've already got the one from the front of the vehicle started, it's harder to get the back one done because you can't wiggle it around as much. So once the one in the back is tightened up by hand, I will put the bolt in from the front, and that's the one that's on the bottom of the starter. Once those are hand tight, you can go back with a ratchet and tighten them up with a ratchet. And will want to be careful, don't over tighten them, because the bolts that hold them in are aluminum. Once that is tightened up, you can reinstall the connectors, and that is a screw-on connector on the top and a plug-in connector that's right in the middle. If you follow these instructions, you'll probably have this entire job completed in between an hour and an hour and a half. It took me just a hair over 1 hour, and I was recording this, so that took me a little bit of extra time. So here's a view so you can see the starter in place, and I'm just putting on those connectors that I was talking about. After that, you will start replacing all the parts. So one of the first things you want to do before replacing, putting the intake manifold back, is just to look to make sure your gaskets are still in good shape. You can just purchase a new set of gaskets and replace those gaskets if you'd like. They are a rubber O-ring style gasket, so they are reusable. But a lot of people will replace them. So here I'm just putting the intake manifold down over the studs and lifting it into place and making sure it's in place. After I do that, then I can replace the bolts and the nuts. Again, there are 12 of them, so you'll want to put all of those on and tighten those up to the correct torque specifications. This is not a very difficult job. The biggest part of this job is removing all of the pieces that you need to remove so you can actually get at the starter. Once you're down with the starter, replacing the starter is only a matter of a few minutes. But here again, all the pieces to get to it need to be removed. So here I'm replacing the oil sending unit connector. I'm connecting the fuel rails back up. And making sure they're definitely clipped into place. After that, I will put on the tube that goes to the throttle body. Now that tube has a little notch at the very top, and that lines up with a notch on the throttle body, so just make sure that's well lined up and installed, and then you can tighten that screw down to hold it in place. At this point, you'll continue to look around to make sure you didn't accidentally unplug something that will cause problems later. There I'm putting on the oil pump reservoir, and now I'm putting in the air box so I can hook up the air tube to the air box and the mass airflow sensor. Once that's done, I can put in two 10mm bolts on the side that you're not going to see me do. I didn't video that part. And here I am tightening up that last hose clamp on the airbox tube. At this point you can see that I'm just tightening up things and making sure I haven't forgotten anything, accidentally unplugged something, or pinched something, or broke something. There's that connector in the back of the intake manifold. I hook that on. And then I swing that vacuum line back down into place, plug that in, and then I'm going to replace the engine cover, and I'll be using those 3 bolts, those Allen head bolts with the 5mm Allen key to tighten them all up. So as you can see, the job is starting to close up pretty quickly. Next you'll see me install that steel stiffening bar that goes from above the strut to the center of the windshield. And I apologize again for not showing, loosening that up at the beginning of the video, but it was something that I just missed. So here you can see I'm putting in the external Torx screw right there. And from what I've noticed, the different years, and even the same year, some of them have different size external torque. So that's why I'm not really quoting you a Torx size. You just have to have a set of them and just check to see which size you have. Here I'm putting on that little windshield wiper cover, and next the weather stripping that goes in front of it. Now that weather stripping has to pinch that cover and a little flange that comes off the firewall together. And once you've got that weather stripping in place, you can reinstall the cowling. So that cowling at the back has a little C channel that goes over that weather stripping. So you kind of have to work that cowling onto that weather stripping, and here you can see I'm doing that. After you get the cowling in place, there are 2 little 8mm screws in the corners that you have to replace. And once those are replaced, you can just kind of make sure that your weather stripping is all lined up correctly, because that will allow a leak to come in around your air box. So here I'm putting on the cabin filter air box, and those have those 4 8mm screws, and now there are 2 covers, one on the passenger side, one on the driver's side. They're very similar. This one here covers up your brake booster. It clips into 2 little clips, and then there is a little rubber tab that you have to pull into a little slot. There I was replacing the ambient air sensor, and here I'm reinstalling the snorkel. So everything is looking pretty good. The only thing I have left to do is start the car up, make sure it starts, and then I can, oh, there we go. I forgot a couple bolts on the power steering reservoir that I'm tightening up. Those are 10mm. And now I'm going to put on my windshield wipers. And remember to use the nuts that came with that, and the 2 little black plastic covers. At that point, this job is complete. And like I said before, it's not very difficult of a job. It takes more time to remove all the covers. So thank you for watching my video, and goodbye.